Good evening, everybody. I am Hasiona. I'm a game master here on RP Glory, and I'm very excited because today, or in my case tonight, I will be talking to Brad Diamond. Brad, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Brad Diamond. I'm the one of the co-creators behind Zodiac Empires.
Okay. Um, and what the hell is Zodiac Empires?
Zodiac Empires is a campaign setting for Pathfinder and D&D 5th edition that is fully interactive down to individual groups being able to change the course of the world's future.
Okay. Um, what does interactive mean? Like, how does that work?
Everything from your campaigns to individual things that you want to add, like in names or NPCs or anything like that, are all changeable by players playing in the campaign setting instead of the other way around, where the campaign setting evolves and you have to adapt. It's the opposite. The campaign setting adapts to you.
How would I do that? Would I just go to the internet and be like, oh, I want to upload my I don't know, Johnny Johnny Marvel because he's awesome, and then
Theoretically, yes. Actually, it could be that easy. We currently have a program called Leyland Chronicles that's in the middle of being developed that will handle campaign tracking and integration with the setting itself. And then on an individual basis, if you wanted to add, let's say, a new NPC or a town, or you wanted to create a new magical item, that's just a matter of submitting it on the forums and getting it approved by the community.
okay, so there's kind of a community moderating itself system.
Pretty much, yes. That way we don't run into problems where, let's say that the core dev team, myself and Frank and Rachel, believe that this campaign's really great. We're just going to throw it into the setting without anybody else having a say, and then the community goes, "Why the hell did you do this? We don't like this. Please
What are you
make this
doing?
go away." But on the flip side of that, the dev team does have what I like to call the veto power. So if the community votes that something gets promoted into the campaign setting through things such as vote manipulation or anything like that, we can veto anything that comes in that we deem doesn't fit the world or what we're trying to portray. But hopefully that will only be used whenever we get trolled and not for everything that comes in. We
Long
don't
live
plan
the
on
internet.
ever using it, hopefully.
Okay. Um, this Leyline Chronicles, I've seen it mentioned, but what is it?
It's a online web tool, so you can use it it's for GMs mostly, but also for players. Think of it as a campaign assistant and less of a homework item. Um, One of the big problems with DMing is that 90% of your work is done before the session even starts. So we're trying to make it so the Leyline Chronicles can be used while you're playing without interacting or interfering with anything you're actually trying to do. It essentially expedites note taking and keeping track of little details that GMs tend to forget. I myself forget things very often. It's actually one of the reasons why this started. um,
Yeah.
so it's less homework after the session and more useful during the session. So you won't find yourself spending hours getting your campaign updated when all you have to do at the end of the session is like essentially create a small summary. So you just take the notes that you took and then like pick the ones that are important. So when the next session starts, your players already know what happened last session and can check on NPCs and whatever you feel like keeping track of.
Okay. Can you give an example of something you added to, I don't know, make it more convenient?
So let's say that I think my favorite thing about this is the ability to give out items and gold and everything else without having to individually write it down and make sure your players are keeping track and things like that. So let's say the party completes this sweet quest for this, I don't know, tavern keeper, and he gives them all 50 gold. You can just, on the far right side of the app, you just type in the You just type in 50 gold, choose the players it goes to, and put in Y, and then hit send, and all the players will receive that, and a note will automatically be generated into your log to determine where the gold came from, why they got it, and who it went to. So it's less of, your GM says, everybody write down 50 gold, and then of course there's that one player who wasn't paying attention at that moment, forgets, and then we don't know
And
why balance sheets aren't correct 3 weeks later. So it's just something to, ease everything in.
yeah, I know those moments where it's like, hey, but how come you have more XP than I do? Well, I don't know. Did I forget to write it down? Or
Yeah, that's one of those things as well. It's like just keeping track of everything for players and DM. So the players will have the same app that the DM does, and hopefully they'll only have to use it when they are trying to look up information about the campaign that's going on, because it happens sometimes where a DM will introduce an NPC, and then 8 months later, the players completely forget who this person is, but he's really important, and they really should know what his name is.
that is pretty cool. I've been trying to get my players to do some note making of themselves, but it's been challenging to convince them to keep it up to date.
Yeah, because especially from a player's point of view, they just view it as like extra work that you're already taking care of, so you'll just tell me when I need it, right?
Yeah, right.
There's one of the cool things I really liked is we implemented essentially a plot development tool, so you can create a plot web, I guess it would be.
Yeah,
And
nice.
then for each individual part of the web, you can have like known and unknown information. So the party needs to know this 6 bits of information before they can go to the next part or make a decision or something like that. You can just essentially just give the players that information as you're storytelling. So you know what parts that they're missing, and they can go back and look at all the parts that they've learned and
That
make
is cool.
ideas off of that. So it's we're hopefully taking all the note taking out and more of just like an instant messaging service, I guess.
Yeah, that is pretty useful because I remember my players, like me trying to copy some of my notes for my players, but then I created in a flowchart and I had to like uh, use paint to remove all the bits that they weren't allowed to see.
Yeah, it's essentially exactly what we did. Is you can, as a DM, you can while you're creating your flow chart, you would just determine whether this is GM knowledge or player knowledge. So, and you can flip that as the plot line progresses. So they would see the same flow chart as you, but only see the parts that they know about, not like all the connections that you've made.
That is pretty cool. Um, Now for a GM who's never done anything that is not homebrew, um, like what would your setting offer me, or what would I have to like do myself? Like what is the idea with such a thing you offer?
Okay, so from to put this in perspective, Zodiac Empires started as a homebrew world and then evolved into what it is today. So we realized about 3 years ago that we enjoyed generating information and fleshing out this world and progressing it forward, and there's no reason why we can't let other groups do that, which is essentially the idea behind the whole project. From somebody who only handles homebrew, such as yourself, you can run the same kind of campaigns you normally would, but you'd also be running them alongside essentially a large community that you can pick and choose from. So let's say Brad over here is running one campaign, you're running another,
Mm-hmm.
and you're sort of in the same area in the world. You can be like, hey, Brad, do you want to collaborate for one session where your players meet mine and then they go off and do this other thing? Or can I use this NPC that you created because he kind of fits into the same thing that I needed? So it can take a little bit of work off of you to create up, random NPCs or flesh out
Mm-hmm.
cities or anything like that, to save you a lot of time because somebody else, had already done it, or you like borrowing somebody else's stuff. But you can still create the same kind of things you normally would in your own campaign settings, without having to do all the work, I guess.
Okay. Um, And how did you handle this I guess struggle between creating a lot of information for game masters who want, a lot of information about everything, and game masters who want a lot of, flexibility? Or do you think those aren't exclusive?
I don't necessarily believe that they're exclusive. I just think it's more of a spectrum. You have some DMs that want to jump into a world and experience the world as it was meant to be experienced. And then you have some GMs who go, I like some of the ideas from this, but I don't want to use all of them. You can technically do both. And the idea is that you can use Leyland Chronicles in one of two ways. You can go with an interactive manner. So you're part of the timeline that progresses forward, and then you essentially have to integrate your campaigns into the world. And then on the other side of that, you can just use the world as it is and build off of it without having to worry about integrating yourself with the timeline and making sure that everything's correct. So we're offering everybody the ability to essentially pick and choose. So you can either be fully interactive or you can just run your own stuff as you normally would.
Okay. I guess that must be cool for game masters and players as well, to see how potentially the things they do affect so many other campaigns and players, and who also play in the same world.
Yeah, that's actually one of the reasons why we decided to make it interactive. Was essentially everybody has a story to tell, and there's no reason why you have to keep it between you and your gaming group. So, like, you make that really sweet character, and you play him, and, you have this whole backstory thing. At the end of that campaign, the only person who knows about him is you and your players and your GM.
Yeah.
And then that's not really that great. There's no reason why you can't share that same character with other people playing in the same world as yourself and have it become part of the world. I mean, as a player, it'd be pretty interesting for the Zodiac Empires development team to come contact you later and, be like, well, I have this idea for your character. Would this fit? Would you like him to be part of this, like, main plot line that's going on? Would this work? And then stuff like that. It's essentially what happened to a lot of the players that have been at my tables in the last 8 years is, Frank makes this really sweet character, and then 5 years down the line, he stopped playing him, but I'm like, hey, Frank, do you think this would be a great idea if we did this, this, and this with Loomis? And he'd be like, oh, yeah, because then, it's cool to see your characters and your plots become a permanent part of something instead of just a one-time thing between you and your friends.
Yeah. I can definitely see the appeal in that. Can you tell me a little about the world? I mean, I've read your website, but there's a lot of unanswered questions. Obviously, I mean, I'm sure that obviously you also have to get into the what are you bringing out, a book or?
It's a 300-page camp. Oh, it's actually 3 books. One's a 30-page introduction to Zodiac Empires. It's just like hey, this is what the world's like. This is what's going on. Here's a few nations. Here's the introduction to the races and things like that. And then we have a 100-page player's guide. So everything a player needs to know to play in the setting. And then essentially the campaign book, which is going to be 300 pages, which contains pretty much all the information that we currently have for the setting. Well, not that we have, but that is integral to the initial introduction. Because essentially the reason why we split this up is the 30-page is a good idea to give your players before you've even decided on a setting, or if you're just going to make your own, to see if they're interested. Then the 100-page is everything a player needs, so there's no reason for them to get all the nitty-gritty details of all the sweet plot arcs that are going on that they might be involved in. And then you can also view that as like the book is essentially written in the viewpoint of somebody who lives in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So the players would only know the knowledge that people who live there would. And then the 300-page campaign guide is literally everything. It's everything a GM would need to ever run a campaign in the world. We tried to emulate a little bit of history that a lot of people or a lot of settings tend to ignore, which is the early industrial age.
Hmm.
So while we do have guns, they're not very widespread. Swords and sorcery are still the primary methods of combat, mostly because they're useful. So you have your high fantasy mixed with a little bit of realism. Um, we've taken a lot of inspiration from like World War I and World War II and the Napoleonic Wars and the Holy Roman Empire and tons of things from the past. So it's a world you should be able to recognize while simultaneously enjoy without feeling like a history lesson.
Right. You said you like that specifically about the world, right? That it was uh, that it felt. I forgot what you used for a word, but that it had that industrial side to it.
Yes. In particular, I'm a fan of nostalgia, so we should be able to essentially experience a world that all of us were born way too late to like really get into. Um, but I really like the early industrial age where essentially anybody can carve out any portion of the world for themselves.
Was that what inspired the campaign way back when you started, or was there something
No,
else?
actually, early Zodiac Empires was entirely different than it currently is. It has evolved a lot over time, but it wasn't until about 6 years ago that we decided to really like focus on a theme and focus on a particular time and a particular setting and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
But since then, we've worked towards making sure that that vision is realized throughout the entire campaign setting.
Okay. Like you've played with it pretty long, right?
9 years currently.
9 years. What did you do to keep it like fresh and interesting for your players?
Well, well. I guess the big thing is that it's huge. So, uh, to put it in perspective, we haven't even played a campaign in every nation that's available, let alone the
Okay.
ones that like everybody really enjoys. So you can play a campaign. Let's see. Actually, we've played a campaign where the party are aspiring criminals trying to set up their own syndicate in the city known as Gloam. We've played a campaign where one of them is the heir to a kingdom she didn't realize she was the heir of. Um, we've played one where we ran an entire campaign in one city without ever leaving. Uh, there's a lot. You can hopefully the detail is there for everybody to find their niche and enjoy it, and then find all the other ones that kind of exist.
Okay. Cool. So I have heard from a reliable source that your countries have similarities to real-world countries. Is that true?
That would be correct. We tried to emulate certain ones to a point, and then branched off radically, usually in one way or another.
Okay. Could you tell me about like the most important countries that, or the ones you enjoy most, or something like that,
Sure.
and how they relate to other real-world countries, maybe?
Let's see. Um, we'll use one of my favorites. I won't say it's my favorite. Washu is an island nation off the eastern seaboard. It emulates a lot of China and Japan. A lot of inspiration came from mine and Rachel's recent trip to Japan, so there was a lot of adaptations and changes that were made after we came back. But the big difference is that instead of like a shogunist society, you have a series of tiefling noble houses that are primarily mages, where they've had an extremely long history of integrating demonic blood into their bloodlines to create a pure race, essentially.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of fierce nationalism going on. Washu's gotten the bad end of the stick at the end of the First Empire Wars and has been under Orezia's thumb for the last 50 years. So you'll you'll find a lot of similarities to Japan, while also finding similarities to other things you may or may not enjoy, with a large dose of fantasy tossed in.
Okay. And the big question is, what is your favorite?
I can't answer that.
Eh?
I mean, I can, but I don't think I want to.
Okay.
I don't want people to only play in one. But I will say that the top three for me are Favere, Tristan, and Washu. Tristan will emulate a lot of Soviet-style Russia, the Eastern Bloc, that kind of feeling. Only Tristan has a dark secret that not a lot of the world knows about. And then Favere actually wasn't supposed to exist. Favere was supposed to be destroyed at the beginning of this, or at the end of the Second Empire Wars, Darkest War-ish area, and then one of my campaigns, the entire group decided that they wanted to bring it back. So we had to figure out how to integrate it back into the world, and it came up with a pretty interesting history.
And what is Favere like?
Favere will remind a lot of people of I would say, this is hard. Probably, if I had to pick a country, it would probably be the United Kingdom at the height of its empire.
Okay.
Though Bavaria is no longer at the height of its empire, but it's on the up and coming, attempting to reclaim.
Right, because it disappeared, or was supposed to disappear.
Yes.
Well, that's something that I'm sure we can see happening or not happening, depending on what the different players around the world do.
Yeah, exactly.
You also mentioned tieflings. Is that like the traditional tiefling race that
yes.
I could find in Pathfinder?
Yep.
Okay.
Essentially what we did is, upon its inception about 3 years ago, when we decided to nail down one rule set to build on, which was Pathfinder, we wanted to integrate as many of these standard races as possible without making it feel shoehorned, which was actually very easy because most of them were already placed. Dwarves, elves, halflings, gnomes, all those already exist. But we didn't have a place for tieflings yet, and then Washu's history was created essentially at that exact same time, so we integrated them into Washu's history in a way that I actually fairly enjoy.
Yeah, I like it. It's I mean, it has the traditional tiefling race, but it's a whole new way of using it, which I think is cool. You also make your own races, right?
Yes, we have 5 custom races that are specific to the setting and the setting only.
Can you tell me a little about them?
Sure. The Amorai, I'll just do them in, I guess, my own order. The Amorai, I was going to do them alphabetical, but I want to save one of them for last. The Amorai are a psionic race of traditional dreamwalkers from the Western Kingdom of Silurai. They are deeply involved in Silurai's history, as they were the only race that existed in that nation at the time, up until very recently. Though they're telepathic in nature, they have the ability to cache items into their own mind hold, I guess you would call it. But overall, they're a very sophisticated race. They're big on honor and reputation. And then we have the Vasar, which are, I guess you could say they're similar to Dragonborn. They're a draconic humanoid race with wings. They can't breathe fire or anything like that. But they primarily survive on floating motes of land in the air. So they have most of their cities and stuff are on floating islands throughout their little country.
Hence the wings.
It helps. Let's see. Then we have the Inuzin, which are a wolf shape-shifting race that primarily exists in the natural parts of the world. They are we'll say they're the natural protectors of the world. As the world gets more industrialized, the Inuzin want to keep the natural world as it is. So you can think of them as environmentalists.
Okay, environmentalist werewolves.
Yes, that's a good way to put it.
Okay.
Then the Eldera are a sentient construct race. Our industrialization was fueled by a magical resource known as Eldrea. Eldrea, well, all right, I guess I should explain this first. Eldrea grows as time goes on. It leaches magic from the surrounding area and crystallizes it, and then spreads. So once Eldrea reaches a certain density in one location, there's a chance that an Eldera will be formed from the, I guess, resources of the area. We learned early on in our industrialization how to force this to happen artificially. And we already knew that Eldera existed because we had found them in essentially locked away chambers in ancient cities and whatnot. And because they don't need to eat, sleep, or breathe and never tire, they tend to create the perfect workhorses. So they've replaced a lot of the heavy machinery and like cars and such that you would normally find. But they essentially, the industrialization of our world is fueled by Eldrea and built on the backs of the Eldera. So,
what's it mean?
Well, thankfully, they were paid for this. It wasn't slavery.
Okay.
But the Eldera as a race, I guess the best way to do this is the entire world's created by this thing called the ether. It's the underlying magical energy that exists throughout the universe. As one of the best quotes I've ever been given for this race is that Eldera is the ether experiencing itself. So they are essentially the physical representation of the underlying magical energy in the world that gets to experience itself, I guess.
Okay.
Overall, they're actually one of the, I guess you would say, they're usually picked by at least one person in every party that I've ever played. Mostly because they have a lot of benefits, but they have large drawbacks as well. They don't necessarily relate as we would to problems. They don't understand the idea of children or procreation. They don't do that.
Makes sense.
And then our last race is the Noir. The Noir were created by the Vandals of the Darkest War, the Shattered Hand that started the Darkest War and tried to destroy all the nations as we know it. They are the results of the White Rose experiments, where Vandal blood was mixed with the blood of humans that worship the old gods. They were psionically controlled and maintained by the Vandals. They had the ability to change their face, learn languages quickly, and integrate themselves into society very quickly. So they were created as the perfect spies for the machinations of the Shattered Hand. And then when the Darkest War came to a close and the Shattered Hand was destroyed, all the Noir were set free. The flip side of this is the Noir don't remember any of that. They only remember from the moment that they were freed until now, unless they die. If they die, they resurrect as themselves somewhere else, but forget everything that they knew about their past lives.
Okay. Yeah, what I read on your website, the Darkest War and the Shattered Hands, basically aliens invading the planet, right?
It's more like really powerful demons.
Really powerful demons, okay.
Yeah.
And then they took these people and they experimented on them, and then these people became the Noir.
Correct.
Okay. Good. I can understand this. This is good.
Yeah.
I have a question because I have seen it mentioned on your website, but I'm not really sure what role it is they play in the world. What are the Zodiac?
The Zodiacs are the underlying forces that created the universe. So,
Okay.
17 dragons came together at the beginning of time and created the ether, and the ether created the universe. So, in turn, they're the creators of the universe, but on the flip side of that, they don't care that you or I exist.
Okay.
They essentially they hit play on a simulation and they're watching it play out. They created fate and destiny that normal people have to, you know, abide by, whether we realize it or not. And then from the beginning of time, I guess they would create a special race, or at the beginning it was one individual who had the ability to change fate and things like that. And then eventually they created the Star Called, which exists throughout our setting.
Okay. And could I play a Star Cold or like is that
Yes,
play with?
Star Called. It's not necessarily a race.
Okay.
It's a mark of the Zodiacs that appears on your skin that denotes that you are a Star Called. In turn, it grants you magical abilities and sweet powers and things. But on the flip side of that, it frees you from the confines of fate. So you're able to change the shape of the multiverse. Your next question is most likely going to be, are all the players Star Called? Which they are not. You don't necessarily have to play a Star Called. We do have we didn't want to essentially force anyone into a box. So there is essentially it's considered a Star Called touched template that you can apply to your player, where essentially sometime in your history you interacted with a Star Called that set you on the path that you're on now. So it
Okay.
grants you sweet abilities and things like that.
Okay. Okay, let's see if I had any more things to discuss. I'm sure I did. Oh yeah, you've custom races. Did you change anything else about like the rules?
Nope. Outside of creating the Star Called system, we tried to make Zodiac Empires as rules light as possible, so we could branch out to other rule systems without having to rewrite the entire setting, essentially.
Right. And you know, Pathfinder has probably enough rules for anybody who likes those.
Exactly.
Okay. Something I personally find interesting in any game I run are factions and how they interact. I read a little bit about the three air factions on your website with the pirates and the other
The
two.
pirates, the pirates, the Bat, the Sentinels, and the Outlaws.
Yes, right. I was looking for the word outlaws. Um, but are there any like other interesting factions?
Well, you can think of each of the 14 nations as their own faction. If you, for instance, if the entire party agrees that they're all from one kingdom and are working towards that kingdom's goals, that can be considered a faction. We have 10 major organizations that technically exist as factions, but what we didn't want to do is have a large number of global factions that you had to choose one or the other of. But there are a lot of options for things like that.
Okay. And did you add any tools for game masters to manipulate which faction is strong at the time?
Yeah, of course. It really just comes down to, it's more of a local thing. So one city might be considered an outlaw haven, and the other one can be considered a sentinel stronghold, and then you have a Sky Pirates floating island. There's a lot of options for things like that.
Okay. Do you have any other crazy plans for future things you'll be doing apart from interactively changing the world and?
For right now, we feel that the interaction part is going to be playing a large role in what we have to handle for the future. However, we do have plans for at least 3 other books that we plan to release. as well as moving the timeline forward and creating. We'll just say that there is the ability for the players to bring an old dead nation back to life, but we won't say which one.
Ooh. Okay. That's something to look forward to. So you guys have your work cut out for you, basically.
Yes.
A lot more caffeine consumption to come.
Absolutely.
What is it like to do a project this big?
Interesting, we'll say the least. It actually started with just me, Rachel, and Frank, and then as we ran more and more groups and we did a lot of like community stuff, we got more people involved, and then we eventually created the Zodiac Empires team as it exists now. It was interesting because at first we weren't going to handle any of the interactive stuff. We were just going to release the campaign setting, and then one of the players that we had asked us if we had any, why we wouldn't do anything bigger with it, and we, did a little bit of research and found that not really there wasn't a lot out for interactive settings in a way, because like even on a video game level, like if you play like World of Warcraft or anything like that, on some level the world is interactive, but in reality it isn't, because the dev team of that game has the future plans, and whether you like them or not, you have to experience them. So we wanted to do something a little bit different, and then figuring out the logistics of this took us 6 months, and then here we are.
Okay. What did you have a lot of technical complications? Like, I watched your game on Monday, the last part of it, and I saw you guys discussing a little bit about the switch where you had to change the races from Pathfinder to 5e, and how that's was challenging in a way.
Yes, because Pathfinder as a system allows for very powerful races. They actually give you, in the, I think it was the Advanced Race Guide, there's a lot of information for creating your own custom races, and here are a whole bunch of abilities, and here what they cost, and here's the cost, you want to stay within these numbers. And we could do that, but with 5th edition, because of the way that it stripped out a lot of the old, we'll just say it's a plethora of rules that were removed that usually slowed the game down. They streamlined a lot of stuff, and in turn, we had to adapt to that. So there are racial abilities that exist in Pathfinder that don't exist in 5e because the rules simply just don't allow it to exist.
Yeah, right. And then a last question: do you have any advice for anybody who would be interested in taking on a project this big?
Find a good team and don't stop.
Okay.
We've had a lot of hurdles and things in the past that were daunting, to say the least. And as long as you handle it one step at a time, there's nothing that can stop you from doing it.
Okay. Awesome. There was quite a few topics we discussed where, there's more information on your website and things. So why don't you tell people where they can find, your website and your Twitter and your Facebook and, other Zodiac Empires content?
Sure. You can search on Kickstarter for Zodiac Empires, and you'll find our Kickstarter, which still, as of today, still has 13 days left on it, or 12. You can go to zodiacempires.com. You can go to zodiacempires.com will have most of our information, and then twitter.com/Zodiac Empires will be our Twitter. So, facebook.com/Zodiac Empires is our Facebook. For Twitter, you will find a lot of information coming from Rachel. She is twitter.com/ZE_EVJ, I believe. So it's ZE_EVIEJ. Mostly because she handles a lot of our Twitter stuff because she's Rachel and she loves it. You can also go to starcall.com if you want to read our comic, which I think I'm releasing panel 3 today.
Nice.
That'll be updated every Sunday, as far as we can tell, into the indeterminate future. We have a lot of plot lines and stuff that we want to portray and give people a sense of, oh, so this is how the world is supposed to be portrayed, or this is the kind of world I'm delving into, and things like that. So we figured that a comic is probably the best way to bring that about, because it gives you the visual cues as well as the written ones. We were originally opting for like short stories and stuff like that, but we feel like while those are nice, they leave a little bit too much up to the imagination. So we just wanted to
Yeah, that's
get
cool.
the visuals on it. Yeah.
And I love your art as well, like on your website. So your comic is absolutely awesome.
Yes. Our artwork currently consists of only, well, I wouldn't say only, 3 main artists. We have Helen Mask, who did all of our racial art and our holy symbols, and then we have Robert Rymanecki, who handled a lot of our like landscapes and things like that. He handled the current cover art, as well as actually almost all the art on the website is Robert's. And then Rocky's art you won't see until the book is published.
Okay.
He did all of our mood pieces for all the kingdoms, so his will be the splash art at the top of every kingdom page.
Okay. Well, I'll look forward to the book. It sounds like a pretty cool world, and I'll definitely take a look at it.
Thank you.
That wraps up our interview. So thank you for joining me, Brad.
No problem.